Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our first MSP Ignite Resource Network webinar of 2022. My name is Steve Alexander, President and founder of MSP Ignite. As always, we're excited to be bringing this series to our members and invited guests. All of the presenters speaking in this series throughout the year have made a commitment to provide our membership with actionable insight into areas that can help them grow or otherwise impact their bottom line in a positive way. Certainly today's topic is something that every year we like to kick off the year with to help everybody out, both our members and the visitors. Before I introduce our speakers, just want to go over some of the logistics and ground rules. First off, everybody is muted on this call today except for the speakers. We are indeed recording the session. We will send you an email after this webinar with a copy of the slides as well as a link to the recorded session. So you'll be able to watch this recording and all of our other webinars as well. While you will remain muted throughout, we do want your participation, especially in this presentation. It's cybersecurity insurance. Everyone has questions. Everyone has things they're unsure of. And quite honestly, we have the expert in the channel on with us today. So there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please use it throughout. Don't feel you need to wait. Even during our sponsor's presentation in the beginning, our sponsor will be staying on for the end and we'll be answering questions as well. So don't hesitate, use the Q&A. Please try not to use the chat for this, but the Q&A so we can keep track of it all. And we will get to your questions or try and get to every single one of them. Any that we do not get to, we will pass along to our presenters and make sure they can reach back out to you. So don't worry too much about that. Our keynote today is Justin Reimuth, CEO and founder of TechRug, the Technology Risk Underwriting Group. Since 2004, he and his team have had the responsibility of managing risk and creating policies for over 16,000 IT companies in areas such as cyber liability, errors and omissions insurance, management liability insurance, commercial crime insurance, and business owners insurance. Of course, webinars like this do not take place without the assistance of our valued partners and sponsors. For today, we have the pleasure of being sponsored by Augment. The focus today is to highlight how to proactively monitor and manage all M365 security policies, including MFA, across all tenants. We're fortunate to have Gavin Garbutt, the founder and chairman of Augment, with us today. Gavin, good afternoon. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Steve, and thanks for having me with you today. This is it's always a great pleasure, and many of you are partners with Augment today. And so, as Steve mentioned, what we'll be talking about is the whole idea of MSPs helping their clients audit, monitor, and manage SaaS applications. And of course, one of the main SaaS applications that MSPs are involved with in a very personal and close manner is M365. So all around understanding utilization, but also security policies and security posture. So when we think about this, there's a couple of key stats that I just want to throw it at you first of all. 11% of MFA accounts are enabled, and only 22% of admin accounts are enabled. So this is a crazy number, just about the number of MFA accounts that are not enabled today. And Microsoft has indicated that they have 1.2 million successful hacks, breaches every single month. And 99% of those do not have MFA enabled. And if they did, those attacks would not have been successful. So here's a really, really easy one for MSPs to think about. And when we think about this from a cyber insurance, and I know Justin's going to get into this in a lot more depth, but the cyber insurance rates are going up at an exponential rate. And why? Because there's been, as IT has moved to the cloud and data has moved to the cloud, and there's more opportunities and places for bad actors to penetrate, there's been way more claims, and way more claims means more premium, unless we can figure out how to mitigate the risks. And what the insurance carriers are saying now is that MFA is a must, and also understanding what cloud services and software as a service applications are being used is also a must. So these are areas that we're seeing that are also going to come into the compliance perspective. And one of the ways that we like to look at this is when you think of, for your clients, from a policy and posture perspective, are your clients being managed in a reactive, in a proactive, or in a managed mode? And a reactive is thinking about, okay, I set up I sell my clients M365. I set up the policies. Yes, we set up MFA for everybody. Hopefully, probably, maybe not. We set up rules around password resets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't have a system historically to monitor those in an effective way across all of our tenants. And we don't tend to enforce the changes in those policies. In a proactive way, we're setting them up, setting all those policies up initially, and we're also monitoring to see when there are changes to those policies, and then we eventually will get around to fixing those. In a managed, at the top of the mountain, that's when we're setting them up, we're monitoring them, and we're enforcing them on a daily basis to make sure. So we have a system of records so we can see across all of our tenants in real time who's in compliance and who's not, who's got strong posture and who doesn't. And this is what we want to help our MSP partners, is to get from that reactive to proactive to manage security services. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to get Ali, who's our VP of product, to actually walk us through the story in the actual platform of how MSPs can do this on a real-time basis. So Ali, if you could take it away.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks, Gavin. And yeah, just to Gavin's point there, we wanted to kind of keep this, tactical, practical, show you exactly how easy it is because for a lot of MSPs, the whole cloud software, challenge, it just seems like this, mountain of a burden that you can't really wrap your arms around. We want to show you exactly how easy it can be. And before I jump into the product, I just have 2 slides, and this is kind of how I want you to think of the cloud software security challenge. So above the iceberg, the apps that you're managing, you're aware of, we got Microsoft and Google. Some MSPs go as far as Salesforce, maybe Zoom and other apps. But below the water, there is really this ocean of apps that you'll never truly be able to have all of the admin accounts, own all of the process around them. There's so many line of business applications. So what do we do about this sea of activity that's going on in the business? And the way that we kind of break that up is into 2 buckets. And the advice that I like to give MSPs is you're going to take over and manage and administer a few of the apps. So how do I lock those down, secure them, control who has access to what corporate data, which mailboxes, and for the rest of them, we want to go ahead and monitor, right? So are these apps compliant with corporate policy? Are we okay using these applications? I'm not necessarily going to log into every single application to figure out what's going on, but to kind of that global audit is the way to think of that. And what I'm going to do is pop over to the product because I just want to show you exactly how we go about doing this. So I'll start with Discover, and what Discover is going to do is give you that kind of overall visibility, right? So this is across the entire line of business, who is using which application and what's going on in the business. If I wanted to, I could filter by department. I can jump to my different tenants. So it's a multi-tenant platform built specifically for MSPs. But typically you want to start at your global view. And if it's a healthcare customer and they are concerned about security, then I'm going to want to hone in on risky apps. I might want to focus on low productivity apps that might be negatively impacting employees and the business overall. I might want to zoom in on apps that have low activity. What are these applications and should I be getting rid of them from the business? So just giving this kind of global visibility to a customer and you being kind of that security expert coming in and saying, hey, why do we catch people still using G Suite when you guys have moved completely to M365 and you said you don't want your data in 2 places. You don't want 2 sets of mailboxes. You don't want OneDrive and Google Drive. So that's the kind of quick high-level audit you'll be able to do. When we go a little bit deeper, and we start talking about deeper security, and we're going to focus on M365 for now. Again, it's a multi-tenant security auditing tool. This gives me my 10,000-foot visibility into all things security configuration. This first report is actually a sales tool, right? So I am now trying to win the business of a healthcare prospect. I've connected to their M365 environment. Augment has pulled down all of the information that I need to have a really good sales conversation with them. So we're looking at this environment. There's 136 risky activities that have happened in the environment in the last month. They're happening, attempted logins, attempted breaches from around the globe. You know, customers not doing, or this sales prospect, they're not doing so hot from a security score point of view. And when we look into some of the accounts, the risk levels, the lack of MFA, it creates a really good conversation for you to have with them to win their business. Now, if I want to jump over to a customer that has purchased a security service from me, so now I do own, maintain, and manage the security for their M365 environment, the ability to just have a global view of MFA status across the board, see where it's enforced or not, and see where it's turned on or not, and the different authentication methods in just a simple, easy to use dashboard is fantastic. But we can actually go a step deeper. So MFA, like Gavin said, you know, Microsoft says that's kind of the #1 thing you should be doing. But of course, MSPs, you know, we're going to go in and try to lock down our customer and harden that environment a little bit more. So let's see how I'm doing from a security posture point of view. So Augment is taking a look at the posture, the policies that I have in place for this customer. I'm doing pretty good for admin accounts. I'm doing okay for user MFA. That's something I've got to keep working on. I've created a branded portal so employees don't get phished by fake portals and other sources. And I've allowed them to reset their own passwords. Now, maybe the next thing I want to go tackle is I want to lock down the environment so that certain countries can't access the environment. If I'm dealing with a local or a regional customer, someone who only resides in North America, why would I allow people to log in from Europe and Asia and other countries and continents, right? I could just easily go down, lock those access, and I could turn off Teams default sharing and things like that. Now, before I jump to the summary report, let's say I did want to go in to this customer because I've spotted a couple accounts where I do want to turn on MFA and jump around and kind of manage the environment. It's as easy as you can imagine to come in and just turn on MFA while I'm here, onboard a new user, offboard a user, change the groups that they belong to. So you kind of go from that 10,000-foot view of the security audit to jumping straight into engage to now manage that environment and harden the accounts or harden the environment as a whole. Going back to secure, so we talked about winning business with a threat report, using MFA and that really good security posture audit. And finally, the thing that I wanted to close on is a summary report, or think of it like a QBR report for your customer. All of these from product, you can download them as a PDF. We have a great third-party reporting tool to help you customize, tailor the reports any way that you want. And so let's say, you know, a couple months have gone by and I want to sit down with this customer and show them what's going on in their environment. Well, the incidents are going down. We've increased their security score. The MFA rollout is going really well. And you might even want to take this opportunity to say, hey, you know, we're at 67% turned on. The last 33%, we're working with those employees. Are you okay with this pace? Do you want us to go a little bit more heavy-handed and just turn it on? So it gives you really good talking points for speaking with that customer. And I'd say this is one of my favorite parts of the report, to show them the hard facts about where the attempted breaches are coming from and which accounts are being targeted. But the fact that you've actually prevented breaches from happening because you turned on MFA, because you prevented logins from certain countries, and you really hardened their environment. So again, fantastic customer conversation. And this is the "What have you done for me lately" report that really comes back and shows your value as a service provider. And I'm sure Gavin will hit on this, but we find that this level of a conversation where you're talking to them about their M365 environment, about real security threats, it really is a game changer from a customer relationship and service offering. It really makes MSPs stand out. So if I just want to hop back here, Gavin, I'll pass it back to you. Gavin, are you there? Gavin, I assume
Sorry.
you're on mute.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Just cognizant of time, ladies and gentlemen, we have a fantastic special for the MSP Ignite members. So if you contact Ali, myself, or you go to claim your offer at the bottom, we would love to chat with you, get you set up on a trial demo. We have, as I say, a significant premium for you. We want to help you get in front of your customers and sell more services. And we have a really great hack to help you cover the cost of the increase of the Microsoft licenses. But given the nature of the time right now, I'm going to actually thank you very much for taking these few minutes and giving us the opportunity to be with you. And I'm going to pass it over to Justin so that he can give us some great information on the cybersecurity insurance industry threats and opportunities. Justin, over to you, sir.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gavin. I appreciate that. Was great by you and Ali. Listen, for my part of this presentation, I just kind of wanted to bring everyone up to speed with what's going on in the industry, what we're starting to see. Some of you may have already seen this, but I would say over the last 6 months, we're getting a ton of calls because the availability and the affordability of insurance for MSPs, I guess the affordability is shrinking as well as the availability. So people are calling up and saying, hey, listen, here's what's going on. Our rates have gone from 6,000 to 18,000, or we can't get coverage anymore because the carrier had one person in Florida that was I think she was a $1.2 million MSP. Her carrier was non-renewing her. She was paying $2,500 last year, and this year it was $20,000. Another one in Rhode Island, I believe it was like $4 million, said he got a quote for $50,000 with a $100,000 deductible. So, what's going on with the carriers is that, and this is kind of my first bullet point there about the cyber universe versus the planet, is that some MSPs have asked the insurance carriers to do a lot of things for these policies. So you said to them, hey, listen, be my traditional E&O policy. Well, they underwrote for that. In other words, they're making sure our backup's available. If we get into a situation where a backup is not, that would fall into a traditional E&O claim. Another traditional E&O claim we'll see is like breach of contract. The carriers, again, when they got into this business, they kind of expected to do that sort of stuff. The other thing MSPs I don't want them to forget is that you also have a cyber policy attached to your E&O if it's written correctly. So the cyber policy is a first-party policy as well as a third-party policy. So when I say third-party, that means that there would be an accusation against you for negligence or error and omission by allowing unauthorized access into a client's network. If they were to come back to you and you left a port open or something like that, then hey, listen, that they're going to, the third-party component of your cyber liability errors and omissions insurance policy would respond. But you guys also have a first-party cyber policy. So the first-party cyber means it's going to benefit the MSP. So God forbid there's a ransomware attack and you need to, initiate the cyber extortion coverage, or if you need to, initiate the business interruption or the bricking coverage for computer hardware replacement. Those are first-party coverages. So a lot of industries, I want you to remember, they've got to buy two policies. I've got to buy insurance agent E&O, and then I've got to make another call and buy standalone cyber insurance. A doctor has to buy medical malpractice and then pick up the phone and buy, a cyber insurance policies. MSPs buy, they get a cyber liability errors and omissions. So you get two policies in one. But the third and fourth thing, and this, like I said, leads into kind of the cyber universal planet, is, we got to make sure that you aren't carrying the liability for your vendors and for your clients, and that's where the carriers all of a sudden over the last probably 30 months have seen just an explosion of claims is coming in and saying, hey, listen, as an MSP, a lot of them, again, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people aren't doing a very good job of sitting down, with the clients and making them aware that, hey, we don't actually provide your email. It's called this company called Microsoft or Google, whoever it may be. If something were to happen on their end that would impact your business, that's a Microsoft or Google problem. That's not an MSP problem. And that's where we're starting to see, and we've been preaching it now for, I don't know, probably 16 months, is making sure and sitting down with your clients and, making sure that you're referencing, hey, here's a standard we follow, whether it be NIST, CMMC, ISO, COVID. Within that standard, here are all 40 things that we can do for you. Whether it's, MFA was a big topic of that conversation by Gavin and Ali. It could be, EDR and active threat hunting. It could be a SOC SIM solution. It could be password management, whatever it may be. You got to get all those service offerings in front of the client. And then of those service offerings, make them aware that, hey, these are the 5 or 6, that you decided you want us to pay attention to. You sign, they sign. But on that statement of work, make sure that you're including the terms and conditions of those particular vendors that are offering the service. So, a lot of our clients we're seeing are putting non-public facing, terms and conditions of their vendors. They're putting them on non-public facing websites so that the clients can go, and if they click on the link, they can get access to all the vendors. They can get access to the hyperlinks. But making sure that you're going through this exercise, because if you're not, we, for example, we had an event over the 4th of July with a particular vendor where 2 of our clients, 100 of their clients were shut down. We got no lawsuits. Why is that? Because they're working on separating and explaining to the client that, yes, there is a cyber universe out there. However, we only control our little planet. And with our planet, here are the only things that you've asked us to do. So if vendor A or B has a problem, don't come knock on their door, because much like I got to wait in line, so do you. And then I think the 3rd or the 4th thing that you've asked the carriers to do, and this is probably, to me, if you were to ask me, am I more nervous about an MSP these days as everyone's up in their game in terms of security, having a ransomware attack, or am I more worried about a client coming back at our particular MSP because they had a ransomware attack, or they had a cyber crime event, or they had a business email compromise, and they're trying to use the MSP's policy, their E&O policy, as their cyber policy? I'm more worried about the latter. I think we had 20 claims come through our firm last year of opposing counsel suing our MSP because they said, hey, I'm a little lost here. The accounting firm down the street has MFA on their Office 365. Why doesn't my client? And I'm not saying that, the client necessarily wanted that security, but do we have some sort of, written signed off documentation that it was offered and that they elected to self-insure that risk? That's a big problem right now. Getting into kind of where the carriers are at, those that are hanging in the game, they're starting to sublimit. So they might, where in years past, they might have offered, if you took out $1 million policy, $1 million in cyber extortion. I had someone send me one where the cyber extortion was $60,000. They had taken it from $1 million to 60. They're also getting into, not only sublimiting, some of the cyber extortion, but some of the other coverages when it comes to things like bricking coverage, which is computer hardware replacement. Again, some of the carriers used to offer $1 million, but now when God forbid there's a ransomware attack, there's so much hardware cost to replace, they're starting to sublimit that into, $150,000, $200,000, somewhere in there. I saw an interesting exclusion, from a carrier that they called it failure to comply with risk management services. So when the client, or as a prospect, sent over the policy and said, hey, how does your policy compare to this? When I read the failure to comply with risk management services, it essentially said, and they weren't shy, it was in bold and it was one of the very first exclusion. It said that if you as an MSP use a cloud computing vendor, and when you read it, it's obviously vendors that you would use for backup or email services, those folks, if something happens to your clients or even your information while it's in a vendor's care, custody, or control, if you don't have a written hold harmless indemnification agreement with that particular vendor, then we won't pay the claim. So when I brought that up to the prospect, they had commented, well, why the heck do I have this policy? It's a good question. But you got to be careful. There was another one. And when I say Lloyds, we at TechRug, 2 of our 3 program carriers are Lloyds. but Lloyds is like saying the S&P 500. If you invest in the S&P 500, there's 500 stocks that make up the S&P 500. So Lloyds has 80 or 90 syndicates. We happen to work with 2 of the 80 or 90. But there's some Lloyds syndicates out there that they are now adding exclusions to the policy that say we won't pay for a cyber extortion if it's state-sponsored terrorism. So that's another exclusion that you got to pay attention to. So some of these carriers too, if you've been on a like an auto renew and you haven't really done an application for years, we see a lot of these policies because the carrier isn't going to go and endorse them, where they don't have certain coverages like cyber extortion. They don't have business interruption. They're lacking a lot of the first party coverages. So make sure that you're going through this policy or getting with someone to each and every year to make sure that that policy is kind of keeping up with the times, because there are definitely some changes going on in the market. And then the last thing I wanted to point it out, and I don't want to talk too much insurance and bore everybody without some questions, but we're starting to see a lot of our MSPs, by pushing cyber to the clients. I think obviously it's a good risk mitigation tool, and that if the client has something that goes sideways on their end and they've got a cyber policy, they're obviously less likely to sue you because they're going to go after their policy. But the cyber carriers now, what you guys might, in fact, I sent one to an MSP the other day and said, hey, here's a carrier's minimum security standards in order to qualify for a policy. And it had, segregated backups, kind of the 3-2-1 rule. It had MFA everywhere. It had EDR and active threat. They were all reasonable. I've seen some from some carriers that are like, no one can comply with this, and just move on from that carrier, because those folks aren't in the business to write cyber anymore. They just don't want to tell you. They do it by making the qualifications just impossible to get to. But by pushing this cyber, when I asked them how many of your clients actually could meet today these minimum security standards is this particular carrier, and there's 2 or 3 that kind of run in that group that offer really good policy forms. How many of your clients would be able to comply? And that individual told me 50%, about half. So we're starting to see now clients are reporting back that by their clients and pushing cyber for their clients, they're generating revenue, right? Because they're picking up additional service offerings that you may or may not have been successful in getting the client to do. But guess what? They can't get a cyber policy anymore if they don't do certain things, because the carriers either A, they won't give them coverage, or B, they'll give them an outrageous rate. If the client wants to take it, great. But if they have that security in place, I've seen premiums for standalone cyber clients go from $10,000 to $7,000 because MFA and certain things were in place. So, get out there. Again, it's a good CYA exercise because you don't want your policy to be the first line of defense if your clients carry cyber. But I think you're also going to find it's a great revenue generating activity. You can pick up thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, by making sure that your clients carry cyber. So Steve, I don't know if there's any questions. I just, kind of wanted to bring everybody up to speed with, what's going on here, what we're seeing in the insurance industry, maybe some, tricks, some techniques to work on. And, hopefully we can continue to keep the insurance affordable and available.
Fantastic. Thank you, Justin. And folks, feel free to post questions. I have a slew of them as usual when you're here, Justin, because this is a topic that is comes up quite frequently in peer group. We do have a few Canadian members on, and I don't know what the insurance is like in Canada, or if it's some of the same rules at least, or if you guys even sell into the Canadian market. Can you touch on any of that?
Yeah, unfortunately, Steve, we don't, just because they make you take a license per province, and it's just the cost, and then you got to get a sponsoring broker. I think sometimes, which I totally get, I think that, in Canada, they want to keep that written premium for Canadian agents, and they don't want US agents kind of hopping over the border to take that. So they make it very expensive, and you have to get a sponsoring broker and kind of jump through some hoops. So it's a little bit of a pain in the exercise. So at this point, we do not. But if a member has a policy and they want us to take a quick look at it, feel free to send it over.
Sure. Thanks. And some of the same principles, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, there might be some.
Anyway.
Yeah, I would think, in terms of, cyber extortion and, business interruption and that sort of stuff. I mean, the policies are going to be the same whether you're in the US or Canada. There aren't really, country specific insuring agreements.
Right. It's interesting that for years in the industry, for years in the channel, we would all preach white labeling as much as possible. Why share with the client who you're using? If you want to change AV, for example, the client shouldn't really worry about it. You're in control. You take care of it. And now, not just the whole white labeling idea and sharing who the vendor is, but I think there's a lot more that we want to be open with our clients about, just to cover ourselves from insurance claims. No?
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's white labeling are the nastiest claims that we see. That and private cloud are probably the two worst claims that we see. Because, you know, when you go to court, you don't realize if you didn't divulge, you know, who's doing the email or who's doing the backup service or who's doing the EDR and active threat hunting, and something goes sideways, then the court's going to assume that you did it because that's what you told the client. So they're going to treat you as the vendor. You know, I've been on these calls, Steve, where some MSPs have asked us, you know, will you help out our particular client with cyber insurance? And, you know, we'll help them out. And I'll often ask the client sometimes, like, you know, why'd you pick Steve, for example? You know, and a lot of times, obviously, it's centered around, you know, it was affordable and, you know, they'd saved us money or something like that. But, you know, the second and third answer that they give is, you know, that they resolve the problem the first time and they get back to us in a timely manner. And so I'll bring up to them, do you think that they actually host your email, or, you know, do you think it's done by a vendor? And they're like, no, Microsoft does that, right? So, you know, I think the clients understand when they look at the bottom right of their screen and they see all these icons that you actually aren't doing all these services, right? I mean, to them, the important things are, you know, how much am I going to pay for the service? Are you going to get back to me? And when I got a problem, are you going to resolve it? They don't care whether Microsoft or Google does it, you know? From an insurance standpoint, again, you know, I don't even think clients, the ones that we've seen, because a lot of clients have shared with us, you know, statement of work. We don't really keep them on file just because of privacy reasons, but, you know, they'll clearly put on there that, you know, Microsoft Office 365 brought to you by Steve, you know, XYZ MSP, and then boom, they'll give the hyperlink to Microsoft, their terms and conditions. But, you know, I think with all these zero-day attacks and some of the liability or the exposure that vendors, just whether you like it or not, that they put upon your MSP, you got to be transparent with the client, because if you're not, you know, you could be in trouble. And a lot of these vendor agreements that we read, Steve, they've got end user obligations in there. So you don't have a choice, because the end user agreement says that you will share the hold harmless indemnification limitation of liability with the client. In fact, some of them go as far, if we call you to the carpet, you can produce documentation that you did so.
Yeah.
So if you don't do that, now all of a sudden we get into a situation where the, you know, vendor A has a particular, you know, breach or something goes wrong, and then the MSP doesn't share it with the client. Now we're in a breach of contract situation with the vendor. It gets nasty.
You know, when Augment was speaking earlier, when Ali was doing the demo, and Gavin's off mute, ready to jump in too on this one, because I think it's an interesting connection. They talked about monitoring Microsoft Office, right, including MFA settings. And I find myself frequently wondering, are we making sure we check the boxes just for insurance purposes, or are we really making sure that we're doing the right thing to secure the client? I think the answer is both, but Gavin or Ali, because I'm not sure, Gavin, on this one, but when you talked about monitoring MFA, whether it's enabled or not, how far do we go? And I'll give you an example. MFA has been enabled on my Office 365 or Microsoft 365 now forever. But half my devices, I checked the box a long time ago that said trust this device, and it never asks me. So do we check? Steve, do we go that far in our monitoring?
Steve, absolutely. So Microsoft is basically, if we just think of M365, you know, the old days, you put the server in the network, in the environment, you lock the environment down, you're all good to go. Now you buy M365, there's 14 main policies that Microsoft suggests that you set up for your customers, and that you initially set them up, and then that you go in and you check tenant by tenant by tenant to make sure that they continue to be enforced and people haven't changed them. I was just at IT Nations in November, and I literally spoke, because we had a booth, and I spoke to 287 MSPs over the 3 days. And two of them told me that they set up all of these policies and that they monitor these policies. And they have dedicated team members who go tenant to tenant to tenant to tenant to make sure that things haven't been changed and that they continue to be enforced. So whether it's passwords, when Ali showed that dashboard of the policies that make up the posture, there are 14 of those. And then MSPs can also have their own specific ones that they would like to do on top of that. But the reality is that, and Justin, I'm really interested what you see with your MSP partners, but that little survey of 280 plus MSPs face to face, do you actually set up these policies and do you monitor them? They just don't have time because they haven't had the technology that has enabled them to do it in a multi-tenant way. And that's exactly part of the reason why we created Augment is, this is an RMM for SaaS. And one of those SaaS applications happens to be Microsoft 365. And so that you can have a multi-tenant way of being able to monitor the applications and used by the employees and the security policies across all of your tenants. And, click of a button, okay, who hasn't changed their passwords in the last whatever days, who doesn't have MFA on. And so you can do it globally and then you can fix it.
So Gavin, thanks. Let me jump back in here. I want to tie this back to you, Justin. And how deep do we go, and does it help us from an insurance perspective? It obviously helps us from a security perspective with our clients. But for example, MFA, right? Are we just checking a box that says, yes, indeed, we have MFA on and we monitor that it's on? And is going any deeper help us with our rates in any way?
Yeah, no, I think there's certain things, at least with us, I can't speak to other carriers, but that we trust but verify, right? So we'll ask for screenshots or we'll ask for documentation. When it comes, there's been times where we've caught that they don't have MFA enabled and then they say they do and we'll ask for it. But right now, Steve, honestly, the premiums, at least again, I can't speak for everybody with us, they aren't up there enough to say, hey, if you do this, the pricing is going to go from $20,000 to $17,000. We're at a point right now in the market where you either get the policy in the rate or you don't get the policy in the rate. They're not into, because people have asked me a lot with like SOC 2 type 2s. If I go through that process, is it going to get me a discount on the insurance? We're not there yet. It's not going to happen.
It's that high level check the box that you're doing it, be able to prove it, and you're good as far as the coverage rate goes.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, if it comes down to it, during the claims process, you say you're doing something and you're not. That's where they might want to peek behind the curtain and find out, what you said you were doing it. We want proof.
It's interesting. You mentioned that 4th of July incident, or July 2nd for everyone that's really paying attention. But yes, that weekend incident. I don't know that it's true or not, but sometime a month or two after that, I was told that an MSP received an insurance questionnaire from one of their clients that, like everybody has and receives all the time. And it literally said, are you using any XYZ products? Yes or no? And from what we were told, if the answer was yes, they declined the policy and wouldn't even sell it.
Yeah, again, it's going to vary carrier by carrier, but Steve, we actually had a large $100 million manufacturing company that reached out to us for cyber insurance because our MSP said that they couldn't get cyber insurance. And so when we asked the manufacturing company, why couldn't you get the insurance? Like, why did the carrier stop it? One of the questions, now again, this was just this particular carrier, their decision, but one of their questions was, do you use an MSP and do you allow them to remote into your system? They answered yes, and they declined them.
Yeah, and what are you going to do there, right? I mean, that's the business.
Yeah, I think it's silly. I mean, listen, even large organizations have to remote in. So, I mean, I think that's, I think it's, to me, even the insurance industry, by some of the carriers pulling out, it's such a knee-jerk reaction. Like, why don't you go in depth and go through and take through the MSPs, and take them through a more thorough process and differentiate between 200 credit score MSPs, fine, don't offer them insurance. And then you got 500 credit score MSPs that, you might put a 30% debit and charge a little bit more. And then your 800 credit score MSPs, you offer them the best rate. I mean, I know at TechRug we try to differentiate, but I've never understood their reaction was, well, let's just get out of the business. And so I think sometimes the insurance carriers, they don't take the time, because again, they are for-profit businesses and they got board of directors, but they want to automate as much as they can, and that might work for auto insurance. But when it comes to certain types of insurances, it just doesn't work. And we've seen vendors, Steve, even come in and out where they'll offer through their service offering, a cyber insurance, and those they keep coming and going because the model just doesn't work. You've got to get into the trenches and you've got to see what's going on, and you got to really dig through it in order to analyze whether it's an A, B, or C risk.
What I think what ends up happening is, so large client, right? Well-known carrier covering their insurance. Carrier has decided in the background, we don't want to touch some of this cybersecurity insurance if there's a third-party IT company involved, but we also don't want to announce that, right? So their questions are there so that they can, the customers automatically point a finger back to the MSP saying, see, even my insurance company says you shouldn't be connecting to my machines, right? And now you're stuck. You've lost a client because really a carrier's made a decision that they don't want that kind of coverage.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're obviously limiting, the amount of policies, but like you said, I think some of that, is by choice. I mean, they've got 50 tentacles, right? And so if they cut off one of the tentacles, they'll just sell more landscapers, bakeries, homes, and autos. I mean, that's kind of the decision that some of them have made. But I'm interested, Steve, and maybe you can ask the folks out there after or put up a poll. When we're talking about that, I mean, how many people are really, because I see it going on more and more, but how many MSP Ignite members are sitting down with the client, referencing a standard that they're following, whether it's CMMC or NIST, and then making the client aware all the service offerings that they can get for the MSP, and of those service offerings, what the client's electing to move forward with. Because to me, when I've even talked to clients, Steve, a lot of the MSP's clients, when they end up taking out, maybe a solution here that Gavin offers, or maybe it's EDR or something like that, they oftentimes will tell me that, yeah, I would have gotten this a year ago, but no one ever brought it to my attention. In other words, the CIO wasn't telling the CEO what security offerings were available. So how do you expect the CEO, i.e. your client, to make a decision?
Justin, that section I'm going to pull out of the recording and I'm going to play for our members over and over again, and I'll tell you why. You're touching on something that's near and dear to our hearts here at MSP Ignite. We've had for the last 2 years something called Secure Outcomes, a program run by our virtual CISO. It's tied to CIS Top 20, and it's all about having standards, right? It's all about having standards for your own company and then extending them to what you do for your clients. And when you said it earlier, I wrote it down because again, going back to that white label mentality, we go through this thought process, especially technical people, of I'm not going to tell my clients what security standards we tie to, because their eyes will glaze over. They won't understand a thing I'm talking about, and it'll be irrelevant to them. But I think the onus is on us to make them understand not necessarily the difference between one security standard and another, but the fact that we follow one and that we run our business following one. And here's why it's important to you, Mr. Customer, because not everybody is doing that. And the reason it's so near and dear to my heart is we've been doing it for 2 years. It's free for our members to participate in it. And at best, we've got 30% of our members actually knee deep involved in these conversations.
Yeah, Steve, honestly, I mean, I think everybody, and you and I didn't talk before this, but 100% should take advantage of that. Just because even from an insurance claim standpoint, right, when you get brought into a lawsuit, and I've been through hundreds of these and they're not fun, opposing counsel will say to you, MSP, where did you come up with those security recommendations for my clients? And unless you've testified in front of Congress, you better follow a standard.
It's so true. And thank you for saying that. We will share that clip. It's And for those of you that are not members, listen, whether it's through MSP Ignite or something else, please follow some security standard. We make it easy for our members to do. Well, let me rephrase that. We make it easier. It's a lot of work. We all get it. We all know how much work it is. Justin, you mentioned the need for our end user clients to have cybersecurity insurance, and the question came up in a couple of different ways out there from some of the attendees. Do you guys sell insurance or cybersecurity insurance specifically to people outside our industry?
Yeah, we've got I actually got a call here in 2 weeks where we do, Steve, and answer your question. We're trying to make it tied to the MSP and the client doing certain, kind of what we would call, I guess, minimum security standards that would bring more business to the MSP. There's a thing called in our industry called a stacking issue, Steve, where if you have an MSP and you've got all 50 of their clients and God forbid something happens, even if you're collecting $1,000 from each client, $50,000, you're on the hook for $50 million. So, we can write standalone policy. We just have a limit on the number of MSPs clients that we can do because of that stacking issue, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And it goes to the other part of the question. That was, do you want leads? Do you want referrals from MSPs for their end user clients?
Honestly, I know that's probably going to shock people, but I mean, if you want to, great. But the purpose of the client carrying cyber isn't to benefit TechRug. Use a local agent, risk manager, broker, whoever you want. The point is if you ask me in 2021, I'm so sick and tired of your clients using your E&O policy as their cyber policy, and it's just got to stop, right? And 9 times out of 10, it's because their poor security posture, the MSP didn't document it, they didn't push it hard enough, and they come back and they sue us. We were in 20-something lawsuits last year like that. Like, I get excited now if I see a traditional E&O claim like the backup didn't work and we lost data and they're suing us to recreate 1/8 of the data. Like, that's a normal E&O claim, but we've got to put a stop to the clients and their decisions and their budgets impacting your E&O policy and your insurance. It's got to stop.
It's a great segue to something else I wrote down. And as we've become more security focused as an industry, there's a lot of terms thrown out, but documents such as declining of service, decline of responsibility, accepting of responsibility that we ask clients to sign when they don't take our recommendations, you've probably highlighted the most important thing we should say. And that is simply, who cares if the client signs it or not, sending them out something in writing that we keep on file that says they have declined to accept the following services and accept that our insurance will not make them whole if they suffer from an incident as a result of this declining of services.
Yeah, I know. I mean, at least with TechRug, I mean, we ask our clients, are you providing cybersecurity recommendations? Are they in writing? If they are in writing, are rejections documented by both parties? So if you go back to the client, I think I would make them aware, Steve, that, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Client, you want me to carry malpractice insurance. And I would recommend everyone use malpractice. Don't use E&O. It doesn't carry the same oomph. But if you want me to carry malpractice insurance, I represent to my carrier that I'm doing certain things with my clients. If I'm not doing these things, i.e. making cybersecurity recommendations, putting them in writing, and documenting the rejections, then you need to let your clients know that I may potentially be violating the terms of my malpractice insurance. So do you or don't you want me to work under this relationship with insurance? Because if the answer is no, you just saved me $5,000 and I appreciate it. If the answer is yes, I apologize. We have to go through this and I got to get this to my carrier. I'd start blaming the government and insurance on why you got to do things. Those are tough to overcome.
You know what? You just, of all the good things Gavin said and Ali showed and you've said prior, you've really sent a message to those listening and those that listen to the recording after. Many of you struggle with this. Many of you struggle, to be blunt. I would say if we were in a peer group meeting where I could say whatever I want and not worry about my language, I might say it's time to grow a pair and tell your clients what they have to do and what you can no longer do. And Justin just gave you the easiest explanation there is Because if you say my insurance carrier will not cover me if I allow you to go without X or this or that, that is very powerful.
And you know what, Steve?
Yep.
With us, it's not a lie. You represented. It's called materials misrepresentation, i.e., you lied to the carrier, right? But you're telling them, you're checking a box saying you're doing something, and all you're doing is just relaying the information to the client that, hey, if you want us to work under the terms that I have a relationship, if I make a mistake, we have to go through this exercise. And you know what? I would use, even to me, I mean, most people have been by a jewelry store at night. I have a buddy that does jewelry insurance, and I asked him one time, what happens if that gate's not down and the alarm's not on and the jewelry isn't away? He said, we don't pay the claim, it's excluded. If any one of those three are not done. So go by a jewelry store tonight and you'll see that the gate's down. You'll see that there's probably an alarm, you know, a sticker for the alarm system, and the jewelry is going to be put away. Because guess what? The insurance doesn't work if they don't do it. You know, and you can use, I mean, again, doctors, I mean, using this whole COVID thing recently, when I went into my son to play indoor soccer for this session, I had to sign a COVID waiver. Guess what? Their insurance wouldn't allow us in the building if I didn't sign the COVID waiver. So I think people kind of get, with everything going on, that there are certain things that insurance makes you do. And if you don't do it, guess what? There could be consequences.
You know, well said. You know, two of the things I think we struggle with is related to when to reach out to either our broker or our carrier, right? For example, when a security incident happens, or even we suspect there's been a security incident, one of our clients, our first reaction is to go into fix mode or protect mode as IT people. That's our job. We react. And I've heard different stories about how we should be doing it, related to when do we reach out to our carrier if we know that there's been a security incident with either us, or when do we tell our client they should be reaching out to their insurance carrier when they suffer through an security incident.
Yeah, I mean, think of it. When an incident occurs, it becomes a crime scene, right? So, you know, and under a crime analogy, I mean, you're not going to mess with anything till the detectives get there, right? Or the appropriate law enforcement. And the same thing is that you don't want to be going and messing around and then all of a sudden do all these things and then turn to the carrier and say, hey, you got to pay the tab for this. Let them make a decision. And if you've got a good carrier, I mean, I've been on, you know, again, hundreds of claims. I don't know how many of those have been breaches. But for the most part, the insurance carriers are pretty quick to react. Now, I will tell you, as more and more of your clients are starting to take out cyber policies, we're running more into conflict checks. So conflict checks mean that the law firm might be representing, for example, a cyber policy that your client has, and they may be coming at you, so they can't represent, you know, the carrier that you're with. So I have seen a couple of occasions, Steve, where it maybe went from several hours to an additional several hours because of the conflict checks. But for the most part, they're pretty quick. And at the end of the day, if the insurance carrier has to spend, you know, $50,000 because they were a couple hours late, it's on them. They're the ones that are backing the policy. But I would say anytime you feel that there's, you know, an incident or a security breach, you know, and they've got the proper insurance, get the carrier involved ASAP.
That's what I thought. Hey, we don't have too much time. It's a rather long question, but I think it's an interesting one. So the question was, where does an MSP start, right? And it becomes overwhelming. And this one is it more important to get our customers to sign our new master services with links to vendors, T&C, or is it more important to start implementing a more secure posture? You know, where do you start first? And then he adds, and of course, those are only two options. There's probably a dozen other places that one might say they should start first.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, first of all, the MSA shouldn't contain the services, right? The MSA is the business relationship between you and your client. So that's where the limitation of liability, indemnification, force majeure belongs. But when it comes to like an SOW, again, I guess the person asking the question, do they not have some sort of, during their QBR, some sort of security checklist that they're going with the clients? Or going over with the clients, I would just say add to it. But you know, gosh, in terms of, I don't know that I'm qualified enough to answer, you know, security or documentation. I guess I'd say both, but then they're going to say there's only so many hours in a day. But I would just say, you know, wherever you feel like you have more exposure, if you've only got that many hours in the day, pick one side of the fence or the other and go. But in my world, you'd like to see both of them. And I'm just sharing these, Steve, strictly when we get to claim situations, how it turns out if things aren't documented properly, if recommendations aren't made, if both sides aren't acknowledging what went on, then it becomes a real problem on a claims process.
Yep. And just to clarify the last point we made, because we're right up against it, but Matt wrote, so our client gets hit with ransomware and we actually need to call the insurance company before doing anything. And then he says, our insurance company, the clients, or both? And I think the answer is yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, typically if the client had a ransomware attack because they clicked on a link, that's a them problem, not a you problem. Again, planet and universe. You got to make the client understand that we're not in charge of the cyber universe. We're just in charge of our cyber planet, So if the ransomware attack was because of your negligence, then yeah, I would say get a hold of the MSP's insurance ASAP. But I just wouldn't be making decisions on behalf of the carrier without their permission. I guess, as Steve, is the takeaway that I want to get is, don't go through and start doing all this stuff, because the carrier might want to see, there might be evidence that they want to collect. And quite honestly, they want you out of the way at that point. They'll bring you back in for some remediation usually. But honestly, they're driving the ship at that point.
I would think that the best rule of thumb is isolate and then think it through and then worry about fixing the problem, right? Either get us off the internet or isolate the machine or whatever you have to do. And then consult with who you need to.
Correct. We just don't want to go fixing the problems.
Yep. It's really interesting, folks, that both the Augment presentation as a sponsor, as well as our content provider here with Justin, we're really talking about a lot of the same things. Do I want to appear to be covering all my bases? In other words, checking boxes. Yes, we've told the client they should have MFA. We audit it by meeting with them once a year and talking about what services they should have that they don't. Or do we want to really protect the client? And that is follow proper procedures, be aligned with some security standards, have a tool for monitoring and reporting on more than just whether the box is checked, but whether we're actually using these tools. Especially when you think about it, your world is changing drastically. Companies like Augment exist because the world is moving to an app-based world, right? And if you're not supporting that app-based world appropriately, I think you're missing the boat. So for all of you, contact information is up on the screen. I know Gavin had to rush through it a little bit, but there's a fantastic offer from Augment if you want to check them out and jump in. Justin is, anyone that knows the industry knows, he's all over the channel, all over the industry. He, as far as I'm concerned, if your insurance broker cannot talk to the same level that you just heard about cybersecurity insurance, then you probably should be thinking about working with someone else. This is your industry and you've got to have proper coverage. So for all of you, thank you very much for your time. Justin, Gavin, Ali, thank you very much. Sorry we didn't get to more Q&A. Feel free, folks, to throw questions our way. We'll pass them along, or to reach out with the contact information you have on the screen. You will all receive these slides if you've registered, and you will all receive a link to this recorded video. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.